And I'm thrilled to have with me Mr. Michael Kugelman, who is South Asia Institute of, who is the director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Michael, for your time.
Thank you. Good to be back here with you again.
Thank you, thank you. So, Michael, obviously, having you here is great for our viewers. But just yesterday, we have seen that the White House, I think it was in trouble because the American president said that Pakistan is the most dangerous nation. So today we have seen a clarification that has come from the White House and I also from the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad. So, how do you see this statement from the U.S. president and this clarification as well?
Well, I think as I've been saying the last few days, I think we need to distinguish between the comment about Pakistan maybe being one of the most dangerous countries in the world and his statement about Pakistan's nuclear weapons. I mean, we keep hearing very frequently this notion about Pakistan being one of the most dangerous countries in the world, and many members of the senior political elites in the U.S. have made that comment. But it by contrast, it's very unusual to hear a senior U.S. official publicly invoking the nuclear concerns. I think that's what's so striking and unusual. As I said on Twitter and elsewhere, trying to make sense of the statement, why it was made, when it was made. I think that, quite frankly, we shouldn't overstate the significance of it. Though, to be sure, this is a U.S. president making a comment about Pakistan's nuclear security. I could understand the major reaction in Pakistan. But my sense is that President Biden, like all U.S. presidents, every day he gets briefings on what's going on around the world. And I'm sure that these briefings have been making mention of all of the volatilities playing out across Pakistan with this really serious economic crisis, as well as the very polarizing political environment, as well as the fact that terrorism appears to be resurging. And when American officials look at issues of nuclear security in Pakistan, they tend to look at it not just through the lens of nuclear security itself, but also through the lens of other things playing out across the country alongside the issue of nuclear security. So my sense is that President Biden was essentially making mention of these concerns that he has, that Americans have about what's playing out across Pakistan, alongside what I would describe as legacy concerns in Washington about Pakistan's nuclear weapons programs, and that's probably what prompted this remark. My sense is that U.S. officials in recent years have been much less concerned about nuclear safety and nuclear security itself in Pakistan. So I think that's why we need to take sort of a broader context view. And when he was talking about, when he's talked about, no cohesion or Pakistan not having any cohesion, he was not referring to that in the context of command and control issues with nuclear security, nuclear safety. He was referring to it in terms of Pakistan more broadly.
Hmm. So, Michael, one more thing is that the political leadership or the institutions in the U.S. they do think or they do have such kind of a mindset about Pakistan, but somehow looking at the sensitivity of the Pakistan-U.S. relations, they do not talk and they do not share such kind of things in public. Do you think that there is a reality in this thought?
Well, again, it's hard to say. We have to remember the context of this speech itself. I mean, it was not a policy address. It was not an address that had anything to do with Pakistan. He was speaking at a fundraiser, and he was talking about President Xi of China and the challenges that he has to face. One of them being, according to President Biden, Pakistan and how dangerous it is. So that to me suggests that maybe the speech was a bit of a ramble. I mean, if you look at the transcript, he was sort of jumping all over the place. Maybe at one point he happened to think of some briefing that he happened to see about Pakistan earlier that day, and that sort of prompted him to say what he did. But there's been a lot of speculation and, dare I say, conspiracy theories in Pakistan about what might have prompted him to make this comment when he did. Was it because he was upset that Pakistan abstained from the latest UN General Assembly resolution on condemning Russia? Was it some type of way to sort of push back against this emerging momentum in the relationship? I don't think it's any of that. I really don't think, quite frankly, he thinks about Pakistan that much on a daily basis. And I think that it was just him, sort of having to reference something that he may have read or seen earlier that day related to rising concerns about these challenges and volatilities playing out across Pakistan now.
So, Michael, should we also reach to the conclusion that the incumbent administration in Washington, they are looking Pakistan from the Chinese lens?
Well, yes. I mean, that's been the case for quite some time. And I know that publicly, U.S. officials want to convey a different idea that, they want to pursue cooperation with Pakistan regardless of the U.S. competition with China. And I think that is true to an extent. If you look at how much of the momentum in U.S. Pakistan relations in recent months has been separate from security and strategic concerns. It's non-security cooperation. You have the announcement of a new bilateral health dialogue. Of course, the U.S. is cooperating with Pakistan on flood responses. There's been a lot of talk about more trade and investment in Pakistan. That is separate from the China factor. But indeed, if you acknowledge, and I think we should, that, and I said this before in discussions with you, U.S.-China competition is the biggest priority for U.S. foreign policy right now. And so that means it's very difficult, I think, for the U.S. to look at its relationship with Pakistan without looking at the China factor, just because of Pakistan's close relationship with China. So I think there really is something to say for that. But I am cautiously optimistic that U.S. officials have recognized that there is space to broaden cooperation with Pakistan, even if modestly, despite the limitations posed by China and U.S.-China competition.
So, Michael, how do you see the Pakistan's foreign minister's statement that our eastern neighbor accidentally fired a missile in Pakistan, and then we have seen the uranium has been into the markets in India. So, do you think that there is some sort of understanding in Washington to what Bilawal is saying, or do you think that because of the bilateral relations between India and the United States, they are going to undermine what Bilawal said?
Well, I mean, this is, of course, an understandable reaction from Pakistan. The sense that the U.S. doesn't acknowledge enough these concerns about nuclear safety in India, and of course, the case of that missile that flew into Pakistan from India some months ago, was something that the U.S. government didn't really focus much attention on publicly. And I know in Pakistan there was a lot of unhappiness about that, and for good reason. I think that gets down to the dynamic of the very different relationships that the U.S. has with India and with Pakistan. And I think if you look more broadly at the state of play in Pakistan over the years, there's always going to be more concern in Washington about nuclear safety, security issues in Pakistan than in India, just because, over time, you look at the conditions on the ground in Pakistan, there just have been more threats to the U.S. and its interests. I mean, particularly this legacy of terrorism and Islamist terrorist groups in Pakistan that have posed a direct threat and have targeted the United States. When you see that alongside the reality of Pakistan having nuclear weapons, for many years, less so now, but for many years, those two factors were major concerns for the U.S. Whereas in India, you don't have that type of dynamic, that type of reality. But I mean, this is not to say that U.S. officials have not been privately concerned about those types of matters that the Pakistani foreign minister brought to mind. But I think at the end of the day, President Biden, his comments were not about India; they were about Pakistan. It's a separate issue, and I think one could certainly critique his comments, whether they were exaggerated or alarmist, that type of thing. But it's a separate matter from India because he wasn't referring to India or these examples that the Pakistani foreign minister had mentioned.
That's correct. So, Michael, one more important question, which I got sort of understanding from your answer, is that how do you see the American policymakers, thinkers, people in the strategic community, or those in the media? They still believe that the nuclear weapons or such kind of sensitive technology is still in danger because I think Americans the administration have appreciated, and they trust Pakistan's robust command and control authority. But what kind of a perception is still there in the strategic community or in some quarters in America or in the West? That do they still consider that there is some sort of a risk here?
I mean, I think that for so long in previous years, there were these strong perceptions about the lack or concerns about the security and safety of Pakistan's nuclear weapons that it takes a long time to move past them. And indeed, I mean, if you look, international monitoring groups have affirmed that nuclear safety issues have become much better in Pakistan and in recent years. But I mean, as you know, these old perceptions they die hard for sure, and there's a very strong perception even now today in Washington, which I could side with, that Pakistan continues to experience varying levels of volatilities politically, socially, economically, and I think it's when set against the backdrop of those continuing volatilities, that's when I think these older perceptions about the safety and security of Pakistan's nuclear weapons programs sort of come to the fore, so to speak. And I do think that we may want to distinguish between perceptions of U.S. officials or U.S. Intellectuals that study Pakistan and the broader American public and perhaps the media. I mean, I do think that more casual observers of Pakistan here in the U.S. would continue to think that Pakistan does have issues with nuclear security and safety, and may not be aware of these international monitoring groups that have affirmed that those issues are not as much of a concern as they used to be. And the legacy of Islamist terrorism in Pakistan and that whole story, and quite frankly, the relationship that the Pakistani state had with some of those groups. That I think all plays into these broader perceptions in the U.S. that, yeah, we really still do need to be concerned about nuclear safety and security issues. But that's broader public perceptions here, not as much so perceptions of those that are actually making policy on Pakistan and Washington and scholars and analysts that study Pakistan as well. So it's important to make that distinction.
So, Michael, one more understanding and an observation I want, if you can shed light on that, is how do you see this perspective that one day, for instance, the militant Islamists they come in power, or even the institutional Islamists, those who believe in the democracy, they come in power, they're going to give this nuclear technology. Do you think these kind of a conspiracy theories are still circle around, or do you think that Pakistan's the military, the institution, the National Command Authority, they have a very strong control over the thing. So this notion is still there about the militant Islamist or the Islamists that if they will come in power, they can misuse such kind of a technology.
Yeah, I do think that those fears are a bit overblown. I mean, first of all, I mean, as you would know better than I, you being in the country, that Islamist militancy is not as potent as and active as it used to be in Pakistan, right? We could talk about the resurgence of the Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan, the TTP, but the group is not nearly as strong as it used to be. You don't have these multiple groups posing these threats that you used to have in the past in terms of anti-state factions. And the Pakistanis, as I understand it, have cracked down quite hard against a number of groups, including those that they've had a history of backing. I mean, if you look at the FATF and the fact that Pakistan, barring anything crazy happening, will likely be removed from the gray list very soon, that's a reflection of the fact that the FATF member countries, which include the U.S., have concluded that Pakistan has taken pretty major steps in terms of cracking down on these groups, their terrorist financing, and by nature, the groups themselves. I mean, the fact that Hafiz Saeed got a new prison sentence for terrorist financing some months ago, I think that reflects the fact that this Islamist terrorism threat is not what it used to be. It's still there with the TTP. So I think that's sort of one way of answering your question. There have been, if you look back at the history of terrorism in Pakistan over the last 20 years or so, there have been some concerning cases, right? I mean, you have had some examples of senior militants who had previously been members of the Pakistani military who then join terrorist groups, right? And of course, we know about there have been a lot of questions about some of these attacks on Pakistani military facilities, including on naval facilities, that there may have been some type of connivance or sympathies from some individual members of those military branches. That's very concerning, and it's those types of data points that I think have raised these concerns over the years about Islamist militants somehow getting a hold of nuclear secrets, nuclear weapons. But again, I think it's quite exaggerated. I think it's unlikely. And if you look at the fact that at least the security situation in terms of terrorism risks, while still present, is not as strong as it used to be, I think that makes it more likely, makes it more unlikely that we would have to worry about these types of concerns. I think a lot of it is sort of these nightmare scenarios that people throw out there just to sound sort of sensationalist. But final point, because of the legacy, because of the examples that I gave before about the past, that's what's going to make, I think, many observers concerned and say, well, it's important not to become complacent about this issue. But short answer to your question is, I think that the scenarios that you laid out tend to be very, it's an exaggerated thing and an overstated fear, in my view.
Mm. So, Michael, how do you see that this statement of President Biden, the clarification? Do you think that the dividends, which the visit of Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, and General Bajwa's visit, the dividends of those visits will not wither away?
I don't think so. And frankly, I don't think that Biden's comment was made with any thought to what had been happening in U.S.-Pakistan relations, right? I mean, he must have known that you had senior Pakistani officials in D.C. recently, but he wasn't trying to push back against that. I don't think that this incident will have negative implications for the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. If Imran Khan were still in power, yes, but of course things were looking pretty bad during the last few months of his power to start with. If you look at the statement that your foreign minister gave, it was actually quite conciliatory. I mean, he basically said that incidents like these make it clear why it's important for us to engage more. Right? He was not suggesting that incidents like these make it important that we engage less. So I think that's pretty significant. This is a government in Pakistan that has clearly made improving relations with the U.S. a priority. And I do think that now, after a long gap, the fact that there's finally a formal U.S. ambassador back in Islamabad, I think that the Ambassador Blom will be critical for any needed damage control, so to speak. And I know that he was summoned by the Foreign Office, so I'm sure that he had a discussion with his interlocutors. I'm sure that must have helped. So I don't really see this as something that's going to have major implications. And finally, if you look at how the relationship has been evolving in recent months, it's really been the State Department and USAID, and not the White House, that have been driving the relationship and sort of engineering this newfound momentum on the U.S. side, right? There's, the high-level engagements are happening with members of the State Department, USAID, perhaps a few other agencies, but the White House is not really playing a big role in that relationship. And we know that President Biden has been very quiet on Pakistan for quite some time until these comments the other day.
So one last quick question, Michael, is that since we were growing up, we have seen that there were certain conspiracy theories, and many consider that as a truth, that the West or the Americans didn't want Pakistan to have nuclear weapons. So I have been seeing some reports and people talking on the media that look, this is the same American mindset that really wants to undo the Pakistan's nuclear program or such kind of a thing. So how do you think that how much of those conspiracy theories or narratives would have gone some sort of a push with this Biden's statement?
Well, I mean, absolutely, his comment will strengthen those conspiracy theories, even if those conspiracy theories are inaccurate, as I believe they are. And I think, one could also reasonably invoke the issue of Islamophobia, right? The fact that Pakistan is the only Muslim majority country to have nuclear weapons, in the sense that it's not, it's dangerous for a Muslim country to have nuclear weapons. So I can understand those concerns from those that believe that Islamophobia is at play here. But no, I don't think that's it at all. I know there's long been fears that the U.S. seeks to try to denuclearize Pakistan or seek its nuclear assets. These have been conspiracy theories that go back a long way. They're not inaccurate. I think that the issue here is concerns, yes, about Pakistan, the safety and security of Pakistan's nuclear weapons. But again, as I had said before, those concerns are not as sharp as they used to be. I think also that Pakistan's nuclear weapons program has long been a source of a lot of the mistrust and ill will that developed in the relationship. Just because if you look at the scholarship, looking at U.S.-Pakistan relations in the early decades of Pakistan's history, that American officials were repeatedly reassured that Pakistan was not planning to build a nuclear weapons program, even though it eventually, of course, did. That then prompted the sanctions regime that the U.S. imposed against Pakistan when the nuclear weapons came out. Of course, the same sanctions that were slapped on India. And I know that that sanctions program then set in a very difficult period for U.S.-Pakistan relations. And then in the late 1990s, things were bad for a while. Only after the 9/11 attacks did you have the new counterterrorism alliance that emerged. So I think that a lot of the baggage in this relationship is sort of baked into Pakistan's nuclear weapons program and how it was perceived by the U.S., the concerns the U.S. had about it, and Pakistani perceptions of those U.S. concerns about Pakistan's nuclear weapons program. But no, the U.S. has absolutely accepted the fact that Pakistan has nuclear weapons, and I don't think that we should read Biden's comment as any indication that things are changing in that regard.
That's great. So thank you very much, Michael, for your time and for your valuable comments. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and many of our viewers really learn from your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Always a pleasure to be with you.